Well, howdy everyone. Today I wanted to talk about key signatures, modes, and how those things relate to each other. And this subject kind of came about because Stefan and I were talking about how to figure out what key a riff or a melody is in, essentially. We were figuring out what notes he was playing in the riff he had written, and he was asking what key it was in. And I said, well, with keys, it's all about context. And so we started having a discussion about how to know how to find what key or determine what key a passage of music would fit into. And so I want to talk about that today and how closely related some keys can be and why you have to have a lot of context when you are figuring out a piece of music that has already been written, or you how that allows you to be able to determine for yourself what key you want to fit that passage of music or riff into. We're going to think back on the last lesson where we talked about what a key signature was, and we talked about the key of C major, and so that's where we're going to start today. If you'll notice, I'm not holding a guitar. We're not going to talk about guitar today, really. We're going to talk about these concepts. I will show some images on how to apply these concepts to guitar, but the most important thing is to understand these concepts first before you try to apply them to the guitar. So let's talk about the key of C major. There are no sharps or flats. In C major, when we're talking about the circle of fifths, which we'll cover more in a second, the next key in the circle of fifths would be G major. G major and C major are very closely related because C major has 0 sharps and flats, and G major has 1 sharp, which is F sharp. And so, especially when you're modulating, closely related keys are something to keep in mind because it's easier to attune the listener's ear to a slight change rather than something major. So when we're talking about going from C major to G major, the only difference is F sharp and the fact that you start on the G, the note G. So G major sounds like this. If you're trying to figure out the key of a song and you're suspicious that it's in G major or C major, you really have to listen for that F sharp note, whether it be in a melody or a chord. So let's say you're suspicious that a song is in C major, and so you hear this chord, and you hear this chord, and you hear this chord, and you hear this chord. That right there is a D minor, which is your second chord in the key of C major. Well, because we know that the chord D major is comprised of the notes D, F, and A, if you're trying to determine whether it's C major or G major, you would be listening for D minor or D major. Because the difference between D major and D minor is whether there is an F natural or an F sharp. That would be an easy way to determine whether you were listening to something in C major or G major, is listening for a chord or a passage or melody that had either F natural or F sharp in it. Because that's the only difference between C major and G major. And so you would need to know how many sharps or flats are in each key. So let's go through that. Let's go over that and talk about the circle of fifths. So let's talk about the circle of fifths, and we're just going to list how many sharps and flats are in each key. So in C major, you have 0 sharps, 0 flats. In G major, you have 1 sharp, it's F sharp. In D major, you have 2 sharps, it is F sharp and C sharp. In A major, you have 3 sharps, F sharp, C sharp, and G sharp. In E major, you have 4 sharps, it's F sharp, C sharp, G sharp, and D sharp. In B major, you have 5 sharps, it's F sharp, C sharp, G sharp, D sharp, A sharp. In the key of F sharp major, you have 6 sharps, it's F sharp, C sharp, G sharp, D sharp, and E sharp. And we're going to come back to the E sharp here in a second. In C sharp major, you have F sharp, C sharp, G sharp, D sharp, A sharp, E sharp, and B sharp. We need to talk about the B sharp as well. In F sharp major, you're going to have E sharp, which a lot of people who don't do the deep dive into music theory will say it doesn't exist. E sharp, that's the same note as F, and that is true, but the context of what you call that note is very important when you're talking about being in a specific key, specifically F sharp major or C sharp major. So those are the 2 keys that have an E sharp in them. And so even though, yes, this is going to be E sharp, and you can call it F, it all depends on what key you're in. And also in C sharp major, you're going to have B sharp, which again, people will say that's just the note C. And it's the same note, but it's important what you call it. It's the same note, but it's important to call it the correct thing when you're talking about the context of a key, because the whole point of music theory is to be able to communicate about what is being played and why, and putting these concepts into practice. And so the terminology is very important at times. And so it's important to call things by their proper name. So if you're in F sharp major, you're going to have E sharp. If you're in C sharp major, you're going to have E sharp and B sharp. So let's talk about why the circle of fifths is important, and an easy way to remember what sharps are included in those keys. The circle of fifths is called the circle of fifths because as you add sharps, additional sharps to each key as you go between them, for example, C major to G major, that G, the next key up from C in the circle of fifths, is the fifth of C. So what I mean by that is the note G is the fifth note in the key of C. So I guess that's an easy way to remember what the next key is in the circle of fifths. You just go up a fifth. So C, D, E, F, G. If you were in the key of G and you were adding a sharp, going to the key of D major, you could remember that because D is the fifth note in the key of G. So G, A, B, C, D. There's another way that I recently, I guess like within the last year, started thinking about the circle of fifths and what sharp is added to go one key up in the circle of fifths. So the sharp that you add is always going to be a half step down from the key that you are in. In the last video, we talked about the pattern of whole steps and half steps between each scale degree. If you'll remember, there's always a half step in between the seventh scale degree and the tonic. So in the key of C major, the seventh note is going to be B. That's a half step away from C. So in any key you're in, you're going to have that relationship of a half step between your seventh scale degree and tonic. And so if you're going from C major to G major, we're adding an F sharp to the scale. That essentially is forcing you to have that relationship between your seventh scale degree and your tonic. So G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, G. Same thing with D major. If we were going to be in D major, you would be adding a C sharp, and that forces that relationship between C sharp and D. So D major is D, E, we keep the F sharp, G, A, B, C sharp, D. So that's a lot to memorize, but the quicker you get it memorized and the more it becomes like a second language to you, the better it's going to be. It's going to make you more fluent in music theory terminology. And it's just something that you want to get under your belt quick and make it to where it's not something you have to think about. It's just second nature. Even though it's a lot to memorize, there are tricks to memorizing it. And when I was in school, there was a phrase that I was taught to remember the order of sharps in the circle of fifths. The order is F, C, G, D, A, E, B. And the phrase was, fat cats get drowned at Erie Bay. Fat cats get drowned at Erie Bay. That's one easy way to memorize it. Now that we've talked about the number of sharps in each key and what they are, I want to move on to talk about modes. And modes are this mystical thing that seem to baffle people. And it does take, when you're using modes and putting them into practice, it takes a certain frame of mind to switch your pattern of thought into using these modes. If you're only used to using common scales like the major and minor scale or pentatonic. So I'm going to demystify the modes and explain what they are. I'm only going to explain what they are and why they're useful. So what a mode is, starting on a different scale degree and emphasizing certain scale degrees, but keeping the same key signature. So for example, in the key of C major, if we were to keep the same key, no sharps or flats, but start on the note D and play through that scale, we would be playing D Dorian. It's the same key, but it has a different tonality. And D Dorian has kind of a minor feel to it because you have this minor third. It's because there's a half step between the second and third note that you're playing. And so if we look up what the order of modes are, if you go from the first note in the scale to the first note an octave up, that's going to be your Ionian mode, and that's just the same as your major scale. If you start on the second scale degree and go to the second scale degree an octave up, that's going to be the Dorian mode. We've already talked about that one. If you go 3 to 3, that's going to be your Phrygian mode. And so in the key of C, you would start on E and play all the way through the scale and go to the next E an octave up. After Phrygian, there's Lydian, which is 4 to 4. In the key of C, that would be F to F. 5 is Mixolydian. So in the key of C, that's G Mixolydian. The sixth mode is Aeolian. And so in the key of C major, that would be A minor. That's what people call the minor scale, is the Aeolian mode. And the seventh mode, so from the seventh scale degree to the seventh scale degree, is Locrian. In the key of C major, that's B to B. And it has kind of a dissonant feel because the seventh scale degree in a key is a diminished chord. And diminished chords, not to go off on a tangent, but this is kind of important. Diminished chord has this really unnatural feel to it. So in the key of C major, your diminished chord is going to be B, B diminished, B, D, F. And it really pulls strong to the tonic. It wants to resolve to the tonic, which is your 1 chord. So B diminished wants to resolve to C major. When you're playing modally, really all you need to understand is that you are staying in the same key, but emphasizing certain scale degrees that will pull a certain emotion out of that key or scale or phrase. Each mode has its own feel. And just like we talked about, Dorian has kind of a minor sound to it. So a lot of triumphant sounding music utilizes the Lydian mode. The Lydian mode sounds like you're overcoming something or there's adventure to be had. And a lot of music, I think, for the original Jurassic Park, including the main theme, used the Lydian mode. And so it has this like feel to it. And you can experiment with all the different modes to figure out what feel you can extract from that mode. And so you're just emphasizing certain chords or scale degrees to draw out a certain mood from that key. So once you understand the concept of what a mode is, you can apply that to the guitar. And you're essentially just changing the shape and position of where you're playing and where you're starting to play the notes of the major scale, and you'll get different tonalities from it. These are the shapes of the modes on guitar. It's cool to memorize these and be able to utilize them in solos. This is another thing that can really help your improvisational skills. So I would suggest learning the order of the modes and maybe doing some research on what they sound like to get a general idea of the mood that you can extract from using these modes, and then also memorize these scale shapes. I like to use this image a lot. Just remember your pattern of whole steps and half steps, and as you play these shapes, move up a whole step or half step accordingly to which mode this applies to. If you were starting Ionian mode, you would start on your root. Dorian, you would start on the 2nd scale degree. Phrygian, you would start on the 3rd scale degree. You wouldn't just stay in one spot as you play these modes on the guitar. You could, but that kind of defeats the purpose because then you're modulating keys technically. So remember your pattern of whole steps and half steps, and if you don't remember, refer to the last video. I hope that this helped. I know I didn't touch the guitar today, but these concepts can be a little complicated, definitely more complicated than what we talked about in the last video, but everything builds upon itself, and so we're building layers so we can understand the bigger concepts that lie within music theory. And you have to lay a good foundation to be able to progressively understand the more complicated concepts. If you haven't subscribed yet, please subscribe to the channel, give us a thumbs up, and click the bell icon so you can stay up to date when I release future videos talking about music theory. And specifically, Stefan, I hope this helped you out. This was mostly for you, but I hope that I covered it well enough where other people can understand a little bit more about modes and the circle of fifths and key signatures. If you have any questions, feel free to email me at tapedals@gmail.com, and I will talk to you guys in the next lesson. Bye.